sorry for the delayed start. We're going to go ahead and call the roll.
John Donovan. Michael Hurley. Jay Lipp. Here. Gaylord Meyer. Here. Eric Sonman. Here. Peter Ambrose. Here. Mr. Ambrose, do you have an announcement for District 2?
I do. I'd like to announce that Nathan Schindler has resigned from our district, but I'm pleased to announce that John Jones is back to serve in a capacity. He once served on this esteemed body, and he's back to serve again. Welcome aboard.
Catherine Burstein. John Jones. Jeff Steele. Keith Varian. Ed Bateson. Sam Cargill. Hank Ferentz. Dave McKenzie. Mary McCullough. Heather Dean. Joe DiMartino. Bill Gerber. Joe Palmer. Cindy Waldron. Josh Garskoff. Lauren O'Brien. Andrew Semmel. Ruth Smay. Carol Way. Julie Gottlieb. Alan Marks. Joe Siebert. Jay Walk. Liz Esma. Jen Hochberg. Kevin Hopkins. Eric Newman. Phil Pierce. Hal Schwartz. Kathy Braun. Alex Durrell. Jason Lee. Tom McCarthy. Jeff Milorano. Pamela Iacono.
Here.
Ellen Jacob. Lori McCardle. Carol Pontrelli. Chris Timniak. Brian Caffarelli. Brian Farnan. Ray Newberger. Bill Perugini. Bruce Ryan.
Will you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? And I want to ask you all to please remain standing for a moment of silence. And I would like you at this time to keep Bill Sapone's family in your thoughts. He was a dedicated volunteer to this town. I had the pleasure of knowing him and working with him on many school projects. And he will definitely be missed, and our heart aches for his family. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our first item of business is to consider and act upon the minutes of the special meeting held on March 19th, 2015, and the regular meetings held on March 23rd, April 6th, April 7th, and April 8th, 2015. May I have a motion to approve? Moved by Representative Dean, seconded by Representative Lee. Are there any questions on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Seeing none, the minutes passed unanimously. The next item on the agenda is review of bond council opinion on the approval process for bonds in the town of Fairfield. And I will defer this item to the first selectman.
Thank you. We have attorney John Staffstrom from the firm of Pullman Comley. And John, I'm going to ask you to come up probably as much to there or to the podium based on how...
Actually, use that mic and stand. That works for him.
Where will the members ask questions of?
Oh, that's a good point.
If you would. All right. John, it's all yours.
Yep, look at that. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As the First Selectman said, I'm John Staffstrom. I'm the head of the Public Finance Department at Pullman Comley, your bond counsel. And at the request of the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance and this body, we were asked to provide you with an opinion on the actual bonding procedures for the town of Fairfield, which is the result of why you have this. Let me just say that as a background on our firm, we're bond counsel probably for 25 Connecticut municipalities, cities and towns, from the size of Bridgeport to the size of Reading. So we cover a gamut. And I will tell you that the number of clients we have of the level of sophistication of Fairfield are numerous, and start the process by saying, because many of you probably have reviewed your own town charter is extremely deficient in the area of laying out the procedures for bonding. Many of our clients of the sophistication and size of Fairfield, their charter would have an entire chapter devoted to bonding procedures. However, that does not leave us bereft of giving advice. Your charter does clearly establish that the Board of Selectmen is the executive branch of the government, and that the RTM is the legislative branch of the government, much in the same fashion you would look at our U.S. Constitution or our state government. And the Board of Finance has that interstitial role as sort of a watchdog, a watchguard over financial matters. The Board of Finance provisions pretty much come out of state law, which has a whole state law chapter on the Board of Finance and the way the Board of Finance operates. Your process, which is the same in almost all the municipalities will follow, is that the Board of Selectmen, or in the cases of places where there's a mayor, the mayor recommends two things. They recommend an appropriation for a capital project, and they then they recommend how that project should be funded, which could be funded by state grants or federal grants, or in many cases by municipal bonds. So the RTM, the Board of Selectmen ultimately is the body charged with administering a project and funding a project and budgeting a project. So that is where a capital appropriation and a bond resolution begins. The Board of Finance, under your charter, then has the right to review that project, to suggest revisions to that project, be they reductions, be they increases, subject to the materiality and other standards that we've laid out. And ultimately, whether the project proceeds or not is a determination of this body in the exercise of your authority as the representative town meeting. So the charter is set up pretty much similar to, again, if I keep going back to the U.S. Constitution or the state government, no one body has the right to approve a capital project or bond authorization for the town of Fairfield. You have to go through and follow through the entire process. As I said, the process commences with the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Finance then has significant powers on a bonding resolution, depending upon how that has come to them over the years. And the procedures here on actual bonding appropriations have changed somewhat in Fairfield. If any of you have been here for an extended period of time, you may recall that the capital budget used to sort of be approved as one big lump sum item. This is what we're approving. I think it was 6 or 7 years ago that the Board of Finance decided they should go to a much more detailed breakdown of items, which has led to some of the confusion about whether an item in itself can be deleted or cannot be deleted, or whether something can be added. And in the context of what you have now, where you have sometimes a capital budget presented to you with 10 items, okay, the Board of Finance could delete one of those items because they're easily deletable. That was one specific item considered by the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Finance does not have the right to add a specific new item that was not referred to it by the Board of Selectmen because there was nothing before the Board of Finance. In the case of a more complicated project like a school project, the Board of Finance does have the right to suggest a reduction to that amount, and that would proceed on to you under the proviso, unless the reduction was so material that folks did not think the project could be completed within the budget. In the case of an addition, the Board of Finance also has the right to recommend an addition to a project, again, subject to the materiality standard. Did they add so much to the project that the project was not what really was originally referred to them by the Board of Selectmen? If there's a dispute on that materiality standard, what has happened in this town most of the time, or all the time to our knowledge, and what is the process is designed to do, is the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance sort of sit down and hash out what really should happen and what's really in the best interest of the town. And once the Board of Finance has acted, the bonding resolution and the capital appropriation comes to this body. Again, this body has the ultimate authority whether the project goes forward or not. So one of the options this body always has is to reject a project. And then if people wanted to reject that, there could be a variety of reasons. People could think the project wasn't the right project. People could think the project cost too much, and either the project would go away or the process would start over. This body also clearly has, under the theory that an appropriation has to start, and a bond resolution has to start with the executive branch of the government, the selectmen, this body has the authority to reduce an appropriation, because that's an appropriation that's before you. The authority, this body does not have the authority to increase an appropriation or to initiate an appropriation that has to go through the process. But again, I would suggest to you your ultimate authority, if you're unhappy with that, is one way to start the process is just to say, listen, we have a problem with this, and then we sort of get into that situation where the three bodies have to start discussing the situation again. The one place that the one right that the Board of the RTM would have is to increase an appropriation is you have a charter provision, which is section 12.6 of the charter, that says if the Board of Finance reduces an appropriation, then the group, commission, board, department requesting that can actually appeal to the RTM, and the RTM can overturn the Board of Finance based on a 2/3 vote. And then the last step of your process for actually bonding is the voters can decide, once this has gone all the way through the process, there can be a petition that is brought by voters, by 5% of the electors of the town, challenging that and saying they want to take the project to a referendum. The chances of your action, and therefore the actions of the other boards, being reversed is very, very remote in this day and age of the kind of voter turnout we have, because your charter said that the vote in favor must constitute a majority of the votes cast, and the total number of electors voting to reverse must be 25%. So 25% of the voters, not 25% turnout, 25% of the voters would have to say that they wanted to reverse the action of this body. So that's sort of a digest of what is our 5-page letter, and I'm certainly happy to answer any specific questions that any of you might have. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I guess you call on people.
Sorry, but yeah, Representative Braun.
Kathy Braun, District 8. My question is, and I don't have the letter with me, but when we reviewed a letter that came out, I'm not sure if it was your office, one of our bound councils, it seemed to imply that the Board of Finance was somewhat superfluous and that it wasn't necessary they didn't have the power, we had the power. So can you just explain the difference between this letter and the letter we got a couple months ago? I think it was from your office, and it was confusing, and I think that's why we asked you to issue a more in-depth review. I had a completely different understanding after reading that letter than I have tonight.
Well, we went through your only bond counsel. If there's another letter, it probably did come from us. But I'm not sure the letter you're referring to.
I don't think it was a letter. I think it was a discussion that was had at the Board of Finance from another attorney in your firm.
Okay, that's what it was.
Yes, I know that Mr. Cleary has been
Yeah.
here, and I gather there was some confusion about whether this body had any.
Yeah. It might have been our town council. I stand corrected. We got some letter from somebody indicating that we can do things without Board of Finance, and then we were confused because we usually have the Board of Finance to give us a recommendation. So I just wanted, this letter then clarifies all of that.
Yeah, I think this letter.
I think you're referring to a different situation that took place about the same time, though, so...
Right. When we were talking about adding money to some project and whether we had the authority to do that, it was, yeah.
There were two different issues. We did a refi. And what happened during that process is this body, according to state statute, is the only one that needs to approve a refi, which kind of what kicked off the whole discussion of who needs to approve what and when.
Okay.
So when we were talking about bonding specifically, I believe that was a discussion at the Board of Finance level. But in terms of a letter, we did have an opinion specifically stating that during a refunding and a refinance of the bonds, which we just did a couple months back, this body was the only one that needed to approve that.
So for the refi, we don't need Board of Finance, but we usually have them in the past as giving advice.
We had traditionally run it
Okay.
through all three boards.
Okay.
But typically, to do a refi, it would have to start with the first selectman, the administration, because it would come from our finance department. It didn't need to be approved by the Board of Selectmen, nor did it need to be approved by the Board of Finance. We ran it through all three boards to make sure that the Board of Selectmen understood clearly what we were doing and why it was different. We ran it through the Board of Finance for the same reason, to make sure they understood what we were doing and why it was different. By the time it came to this board, you were doing the same thing you always did. You were just doing it without the guidance from the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance.
Okay, so that's a distinction between that, and I believe it was Representative Basin that made a motion to add to the bond for the walkways at Riverfield School, and then we couldn't vote on it, as I recall, because we weren't sure if we had the authority, if the Board of Finance had it, because we're talking about two different types of situations then?
Yeah, let me just try to clarify. First of
Thank
all,
you.
the selectman when he talks about a bond refunding, there's a specific state law that trumps all charters that says only the legislative body needs to approve a bond refunding. You historically have gone through your process, but the reason for that is bond refundings are sometimes very interest rate sensitive, and one of the reasons for doing that was to try to obviate the need for going through a long and tortured process if it made sense for a town to refund its bonds based on interest rates. So that clearly is probably the situation we're talking about. The other situation where we talked about adding to the appropriation for a school, okay, and that addition had not been recommended by the Board of Selectmen or had not gone through the Board of Finance. In our view, that would have been beyond your authority.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Hurley.
Michael Hurley, RTM District 1, and thank you for the very detailed opinion, and I apologize, I'm just going to read something off of my BlackBerry, and I was one of the co-sponsors with Representative Bateson of the Osborne Hill, and one of the reasons we thought we were empowered to do that was under Connecticut General Statute 10-289, and if you don't mind if I could just read that?
Sure.
And the relevant section is, any municipality upon approval by a vote of the members present at a regular or special meeting of its legislative body shall have the power, without further authority from the General Assembly, to issue bonds or temporary notes related thereto, which shall be obligatory upon the inhabitants thereof for the purpose of financing in whole or in part any school building project. Now, I'm not a lawyer. Could you help me rectify how your memo trumps that statement there, or how that's integrated into your memo?
Yeah. In our opinion, and I understand there was some confusing advice on this previously from our office, so I will admit that. In our opinion, when we went back and looked at this as a group, in our opinion, this does not trump the normal process in the town of Fairfield. What it does say is that you have the right, okay, to issue bonds and to do this, but it does not trump your regular process.
Okay, but if I'm reading this statute, and again, I'm not a lawyer, it seems to suggest to me that this body has the authority to essentially issue a bond for a school project and not have to start with the other boards.
That would not be our opinion. That would not be. We read this statute together with your normal charter provisions, which again set up a form of government where the executive is charged with the construction of these projects, ultimately overseeing that, the budgeting of these projects, the administration of these projects. So in our view, this does not trump the normal process you go through, where a school project starts with the first selectman's office and the Board of Selectmen and goes through the Board of Finance and then is approved by this body.
Totally.
This reiterates the fact that this approval has got to take place. The final approval has to take place at this body. That's what this reiterates.
Okay, I totally understand the need for checks and balances. Didn't you say a few minutes ago there were certain Connecticut statutes that sort of trumped the town charter, was they couldn't be inconsistent?
The refunding statute is very clear that it's the legislative body that needs to approve that.
Okay, but you think that statement from Connecticut State Statute 10-289 that I read is unclear?
We do not read this, and we have not read this for any of our other clients, as obviating the normal local process. Because if you really looked at the variety of processes that Connecticut cities and towns follow, okay, this, and you read this in conjunction, and you read this apart from a normal process, a legislative body, a municipality could decide to go out and fund $25 million for a school, or $50 million for a school, or build a new high school without the mayor or the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance being involved in the process. And ultimately, that becomes not just a capital fund issue, but it becomes a budgetary issue for the next 20 years, when you've got to build that into your budget. So you really do need to read these, sections together.
Okay, that was very helpful. Thank you.
I think it really is all about checks and balances.
Representative Ambrose.
Good evening. Peter Ambrose, District 2. Thanks for coming tonight. I've got a question. If a bonding resolution is before us, and it's not, it's for two things, i.e., let's say, building a library within a school, and also for performing a roof addition at that same school, do we have the right to allocate that amount of bonding to either project, so that in the event that there are overruns, a disproportionate amount of that money is not used for the library as relative to the roof? Do we have the right, as the RTM, to do that, to allocate the bonding that's being used?
I think, and I don't want to be obscure about the question tonight, but I think partly it's the way it's presented to you. It's very clear when you get, it's very clear if you get a list of capital projects, which is a fire truck and a dump truck and this or that, you can decide to pick and choose. You can decide to approve or reject those, and so can the Board of Finance up on that. When you get to a school project, the question really in the case of a school project, is it presented to you as an integrated project, or is it presented to you in pieces? And I also would suggest that the history of how it got to you is important. What did the building committee recommend to the Board of Selectmen? Did the building committee take the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen? Did the Board of Selectmen take the recommendation of the building committee as it was? Did they decide to modify that? And the same process goes along the line. So I think you've got a sort of, again, the whole theory is that the appropriation doesn't start here, okay? So I think it's really, I hate to be obscure this, I think it's really a fact-specific situation. Ultimately, what you hope that one of the roles of the Board of Finance has been is to vet a project and say, vet what the Board of Selectmen have done and vet a project and say, can we build this project within the amount of money that's been proposed, so that you don't run into cost overruns, and we know that projects do.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Representative Palmer.
It's a busy district.
Joe Palmer, District 4. It makes complete sense, the checks and balances that would be necessary for appropriating that kind of funds for a project. But can you speculate as to why that statute that Mr. Representative Hurley referred to, why it was even written, and what instances would that actually come into play?
All I can suggest to you, and if there are other lawyers in the room, they will agree on this, Connecticut statutes are not the most well-written statutes that we've ever seen. I mean, they are just, frankly, they're not well-written. I would view this as reiterating the parts of other parts of law that say ultimately a legislative body in a town such as Fairfield has got to approve a school building project. That's what I would read it to say.
So it was incomplete in terms of kind of, or maybe it had some assumption that there would
I
be
am-
this other, it was the final say. That's really,
Yes.
Okay.
I am sure, I don't have it before me, but I'm sure in the general bonding statutes, there's another provision that sort of mirrors this that says the same thing.
okay, understood.
As to all projects, not just school projects.
Okay, understood. Remember that on election day. But second question for you, and this might be a little bit outside the scope, but let's say, just wanted to run through a scenario, because you kind of referred to, these instances where, let's say, one of the bodies maybe had a disagreement and they kind of hashed it out, and that's a very informal and on the honor system type of thing that occurs. But let's say the RTM at the final stage, let's take an example like Penfield. It was round numbers, $5 million was requested by the Board of Finance that came to us. We cut off $2 million of that. It was approved and passed. What would the process be at that point? Would that be now up to the building committee to determine what the project would look like? Is there any now new round of approvals that would be necessary? Or is it just, would the building committee's responsibility be more to check in and let everyone know what was being developed? I mean, it creates a kind of a confusing scenario. I just wanted to...
It does. It's a very confusing scenario. And I think that, under your system, I think you would have to look at a situation like that and say, okay, if the original cost was $5 million, and now you've been approved for $3 million, can you build the project that you were charged with building? Are you building something different? And does the process actually have to sort of start over again to determine what you're building with the $3 million?
Right. So it would be back to the honor system, part of that,
Well,
a little bit.
it's not really an honor system. I mean,
Maybe wrong terminology,
yeah,
but...
no, but part of the issue is part of the whole structure here is designed to make sure that people are talking to each other and the town is getting what collaboratively everyone thinks they're getting, and that they're getting it for what there's enough money there to build what you think you're building. I mean, to the question earlier about cost overruns, this whole process is sort of designed to avoid that type of thing, because you're the ultimate authority in this, but the last thing you want to do is people, and it has happened, and it will happen because that's the way construction is, but the last thing you want to do is people come back and say, listen, you gave us $10 million, but we really needed 20. So the whole process is designed to foster that. So in that specific case, I would suggest that if the building committee really had, presumably they've got specifications and they've got plans that they think they needed $5 million. If you only approved 3, I would expect that somebody's going to sit down and say, what are we building for 60% of the money that we thought we needed?
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Seeing no further questions, thank you very much for being here this
You're
evening.
welcome. You want that one back?
You can have it.
Thank you.
It doesn't matter.
Thank you all.
To consider and act upon the following appointments to the Penfield Building Committee as recommended by the Board of Selectmen: Stephen Pitaniello, unaffiliated, 147 Trillium Road; David Zeef, Democrat, 1265 Fairfield Beach Road. May I have a motion to approve? Moved by Representative Hochberg, seconded by Representative Hurley. Is there any discussion? Representative Meyer.
Gaylord Meyer, District 1. Sorry the candidates here are not here, but I just want to let you know that the Public Safety did vote unanimously. But I also, there was a lot of discussion about the contentiousness of the Building Committee as well as Penfield. And we had asked that We have a representative from the RTM who represents Bill Perugini, that they stay in contact with him because of the concerns that we have on how we're going to pay for this. And also, unfortunately, the overages that we've had with building committees. So we wanted to make sure that that was reiterated tonight, and we hope everybody involved will keep us posted. Thank you.
First Selectman Tetro.
If I might, just to clarify exactly what you're looking for, I believe Representative Perugini is the liaison to the Penfield Committee. He's obviously welcome in all the meetings. And I believe we have other liaisons that work with Riverfield. So,
No problem. Just let me know what the public safety discusses.
okay, so we don't need to change anything. Okay, thank you. Just checking.
Is there any other discussion on this particular item? Seeing none, is there anyone from the public who would wish to address this? Seeing no one, back to the body. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Abstentions? Representative Jacob. Item passes. Next item, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Board of Selectmen. Resolved that the Town of Fairfield, 1, establish the Dwight Roof Building Committee, 2, authorize the preparation of schematic drawings and outline specifications for this project, and 3, authorize the Board of Education to file an application for a school building grant. Moved by Representative Burstein, seconded by Representative Lee. Is there any discussion on this item? Excellent. Seeing none. Any discussion from the public? No. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Abstentions? Seeing none, the item passes unanimously. I know we're all anxious to get out of here, but I have to do all this pro forma stuff, so if you could just give me another minute. The moderator has referred an alternate side of the street parking restriction ordinance sponsored by Peter Ambrose, District 2, Hank Ferentz, District 3, Bruce May, District 5, Liz Zezima, District 6, Hal Schwartz, District 7, and Carol Pontrelli, District 9, to the Legislation and Administration Committee under Rule 32 of the RTM Rules to Regulate. I understand that Chairman Steele isn't here, but is there somebody from who's a sponsor who would like to speak to this? Do we have any updates? Representative Ambrose.
Peter Ambrose, District 2. My understanding is that, and I spoke with Ruth May today, it was my understanding that she was going to withdraw this matter, and we're going to take it up and start again.
Thank you very much for the update. So we will consider that item withdrawn. The next item on the agenda is to consider and act upon any matters presented to said meeting and which may be properly acted upon under the rules of the representative town meeting. I just have one item that I'd like to put out there for everyone. The first selectman has been gracious enough to accept my suggestion that we have an RTM liaison to the Osborne Hill Building Committee and the Fairfield Ludlow High School Building Committee. If anybody is interested in pursuing either of those roles, please let me know. Seeing no other matters before us, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Representative Dean, Representative Ambrose. Thank you. We stand adjourned.